we're off now to join Francis, who went up to North Yorkshire, to Newby Hall, near Ripon.
The first thing that strikes you about Newby Hall is its really clever design. Lots of little gardens all come off this big central herbaceous border, just like rooms off a corridor, and each with their own planting style and their own planting season. So when you come here, no matter what time of year, there's always something to look at.
The main border runs all the way to the River Ure, and running water is key to the plants I'm here to see today in all their glory.
This is the water garden, a huge pond fed by a gently running stream and filled with stunning wetland species. So there's Iris pseudochorus, very majestic Gunnera manicata and Regerzia, amongst others. But undoubtedly, the star of the show here has to be the candelabra primulas. They're absolutely stunning. I really love getting to understand and know how a plant grows in the wild. And these primulas will grow all along the water's edge, and they seed themselves really easily in those spaces, just like along this stream here. Those seeds land in the water, float along, and when they find a really lovely place to rest, they'll begin to put down their roots and start growing.
Candelabra primulas are beautiful sculptural plants originating from China and the Himalayas, where they grow in wet mountain meadows, along streamsides, on muddy slopes and in moist open pastures. And this gives us a clue as to where we can grow them in our own gardens.
Any plants that grow in or beside water have a lot of challenging conditions to deal with. The first is they have to cling on and not get washed away, so primulas have very strong roots. The second is that they have to get air to the roots as well as to the top of the plant. So as with many wetland plants, primulas have spongy roots also, so they have air right underneath the soil for gas exchange and all the other essential things the plant has to do.
In simple terms, the plants are breathing and using their spongy roots to hold and exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide.
Now, primulas hybridise very easily, so you can see this huge array of different colours here. This is because they can cross-pollinate. And although they grow by the water, they are actually a little bit more tolerant than you might think. So, if you look here, you can see they have seeded themselves right in the edge of the pathways and between the paving slabs. So if you grew them in your own garden, you can be a little bit more flexible, although of course they will definitely prefer to have their roots damp for most of the time. Here among the grasses, shrubs and trees is Primula japonica postford white with its majestic stems of beautiful white flowers.
Candelabra primulas get their name from the whorls of flowers produced in tiers all the way up the stem.
These whorls contain about 10 or so flowers and will form every 5 or 6 days a new tier. So you can see that some of these have already been flowering for a number of weeks and there are still new flowers forming on the top. That gives them a really long flowering period, which of course is great in the garden, but there is a reason for it. The longer a plant flowers, the more chance it has of being pollinated, because in bad weather, pollinators won't come out. So this flowering for weeks and weeks means there's a really good chance that they will. And you can see the flower form itself really sucks you in when you look closely at it. You can see the throat of the flower, where that nectar is situated, and pollinators can access it. It's always really worth getting such a good look up and close at the flowers, just to really understand them. And the reason that these flowers are so tall, again, it's very beautiful, but it's so that insects can see them in other wetland plants and find those flowers. As you go down the stem, you see that these have very, very big leaves. And there are a couple of reasons for that. So in a shady riverside, that will maximise the chance of being able to capture bits of sunlight. But big leaves in a wetland meadow, which these can also happily grow in, will shade out the other plants around the primulas and give the primulas more chance of growing and less competition close to its roots.
Lawrence Wright is the head gardener here, and he is currently renovating the rock garden.
So this is obviously a work in progress, but tell me about this amazing transformation that's happening.
We've spent the last sort of 4 or 5 years actually working through the rock garden project.
Right.
It's a fascinating story. Actually, the rock garden was designed in 1912, was built up until 1914.
Yeah.
And over on the far side, there's a cascade water feature which was turned on in August 1914. And then the entire garden team went off to war, and there's basically been 100 years of neglect.
Nothing since.
Nothing really since. The tiny little bit of trimming and pulling off the worst weeds, but other than
Okay.
that, not a huge amount.
Wow.
So then in 2019, the team embarked on a restoration and redevelopment project. And then a few years later, we're sort of midpoint.
It's beautiful. So talk me through this. I can see obviously there are the primulas, which you wouldn't typically expect to see in a rock garden necessarily.
What we've done is where we've got the sunny, more open areas, we're then using that as a space to showcase alpine plants. And then in the shady areas, we've gone for a more woodland planting style. So it's given us huge variance of interest in the planting. And then specifically here where the primulas are, it's naturally a damper area of the rock garden.
Okay.
And originally we actually set out with the view of growing the Meconopsis, the blue poppies,
Which are looking stunning.
looking stunning right now.
And it naturally stays wet enough here for them to happily survive.
It's naturally wet, but we've done a little bit of landscaping to try and encourage the moisture to stay. So we've actually created a very slight valley, and it runs around the area that the Meconopsis and the primulas are in. Essentially, rain that falls on the top of either side of the valley runs down to the middle, and then we try and keep as much moisture in the soil as possible. At the bottom of that, we've incorporated loads of well-rotted manure, which is great for the Meconopsis specifically because they enjoy really deep, rich, fertile soil,
Yeah.
but it holds moisture as well.
Okay.
So everything that's great for the Meconopsis is then fantastic for the Primula too.
You must be really chuffed with how this is all taking shape.
Really chuffed.
When we think of plants that thrive in wet, boggy ground, we tend to think of huge jungle-like foliage and lots of greenery. And that's why primulas are so valuable, because they thrive in just those conditions, but they bring colour and they bring vibrancy and they bring joy and they bring flowers.